In the next videos, we'll take a look at setting up a few different paywall scenarios. We'll begin with what is probably the most common paywall scenario, and that is to make all the pages locked by default. We will leave the home page open and the meter disabled. So, by default, all the pages on the entire website are now locked behind the paywall. But obviously, we do have certain important pages that we are going to want all visitors to be able to access. For instance, I have some pages like the contact page and the about page that I want to be open to the public. I can unlock these pages by whitelisting their URLs. Below the paywall settings block, you'll see some additional blocks that allow us to make special exceptions to the global paywall settings we set in the beginning. The first is the whitelist block, and any URL I add here will be made open and available to the public. So let's begin by whitelisting the About page. I click Add Rule and enter in the URL, and click Add. You'll see that the page has been whitelisted. It is now freely open to the public. You'll also notice that the editor automatically removes the domain name and strips it down to the most important rules that are needed. We can test that this works correctly by going to our URL tester at the top of the page. We can test the live site anytime, but since we are currently making modifications that we have not published yet, let's switch this to the draft paywall. If we enter in our URL and click Test, we can see that it is now open to the public. Down here, we can see that through the order of operations, this page began as locked by default, but then was opened by a specific whitelist entry. We also want to open the contact page, but first let's test it. Like all the other pages on the website, the contact page is currently locked by default. So let's quickly whitelist the contact page. And now if we retest the page, we see that it has successfully been opened as well. These are basic examples of opening up some static pages. But how might we handle some other cases? For example, let's take a look at our Pigeon Daily demo site. Let's suppose that we have some basic category landing pages, like local, business, and sports, where we can navigate a list of articles. And we would like these category landing pages to also be open. In this case, the URL structure for this page is pigeondaily.com/category/business. Likewise, for sports, we also have category/sports, and so on. I can open up these category pages by going back to the editor page and whitelisting each of these URLs. I could continue manually adding the other category URLs one at a time, but this could get tedious if I had a lot of these landing pages. So fortunately, there's a better way. I want all these category landing pages to be open, and we saw that their URLs all follow a similar pattern of category slash and then the category name. So instead of adding each category individually, I'm going to remove these two rules and instead enter in category slash and then enter an asterisk. We have just added a wildcard. Now any URL that begins with this base of category slash will be unlocked. I can test this by now going to the URL tester and testing the local and business pages. We see that it is now open because it has been whitelisted by a directory wildcard. So we have easily opened up all the category landing pages. But now let's suppose that we have one particular category page that we want to remain locked. Let's say that we have a members category. If we test that right now, we see that it is open because of the directory wildcard. To lock it, we can add another exception below. Let's come down to the fully locked block. Here is where we can create exceptions to the whitelist rules. any URL entered into this block will override any whitelisting rule and will remain completely locked. The only way to view one of these pages is to have an enabled account. So let's enter in our member's URL. If we go back to our URL tester, we find that the members category page is now locked. We see that through the order of operations, the page began as locked by default, then it was made open by a directory wildcard whitelisting, but that whitelisting has been specifically overridden to keep our members category page fully locked. So this is great, but what happens with another page under the same URL structure? If we test category/members/deals, we see that it is actually open because of that directory wildcard that we added here. To fix this, we can simply come back down to our rule and add a wildcard to the end of it. If we retest, we see the page is now locked, and anything that begins with this URL structure will also be locked, no matter how far down the structure should go. So this gives you an idea of how the whitelist and locked block interact with each other, and how you go about creating custom rules and special exceptions. When you have the paywall rules set up as you like, you can click the Publish button to make the changes live. Now real quick, I just want to point out what happens if we switched our paywall settings to make all the pages open by default instead. In this scenario, you will notice that the locked and whitelist blocks have switched places. Since all pages are open by default, we would instead specify which pages we would like to be locked, and any exceptions to those locked rules would be added to the whitelist block below. So it's sort of reverse from the previous scenario, but the principle of creating rules and then exceptions remains the same. In the next video, we'll take a look at implementing a metered paywall.